That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about The Soul Eater, the 7th film directed by Alexandre Bustillo and Julien Maury, which premiered at the 2024 International Rotterdam Film Festival back in January. Cape Light Pictures is releasing it on VOD December 10th, 2024.
I know these directors' first film.
Their first and best film, which, is a hallmark of the French New Wave / splat pack horror craze of the 2000s, which was Inside, starring Beatrice Dalle. And they have gone on to do a number of other films, none of which I really liked, especially not as much as their first film. But they followed Inside up with Livid in 2011, which was okay, reunited with Beatrice Dalle in a small cameo performance. Among the Living, I didn't really care for. They might be best known stateside for Leatherface, their English language debut, which is of course part of the Texas Chainsaw universe, but didn't really care for that. They went back to France, and I believe we reviewed their last two features, Candisha and The Deep House. And with The Deep House, at least, is interesting because that was shot completely underwater. So, that is something that's worth seeing, but I just felt the narrative was meh.
What is The Soul Eater about? When violent and gruesome deaths start plaguing a small mountain village, an old legend about a malevolent creature resurfaces. What is your pull quote?
For those who enjoy police procedural thrillers gorged to the gills with bizarre plot twists, The Soul Eater is a must-have stocking stuffer, as Bustillo and Maury have concocted their best film since debuting Inside.
Mine. The Soul Eater is an audacious effort, a mix of Cocaine Bear, Long Legs, and the Menendez brothers that may be too bold for its own good.
Yes, and something we also talked about a lot after watching it was True Detective Night Country.
Yeah, so I did enjoy this movie.
I did too. Notably, it's based on a 2021 publication by Alexis Leipsker.
But the story is crazy as hell.
Yeah.
So it's set in modern day in this small mountain village in France somewhere.
It's called Roc Noir, which means black rock, basically.
Yes. And the opening is that there appears to have been a murder-suicide in this small mountain village, a husband and wife. So there are two investigators who come who are outsiders. Neither of them live in this small village. One is played by Hamy.
Franck.
And the other is played by
Virginie Ledoyen.
What's her name?
Elizabeth, I believe. She's a commander.
So they show up.
Like Kelly Rowland.
They show up and the local police have already been there. And it's clear that something's not right because there appears to be no forced entry. The doors were locked when the police showed up. But the two outside investigators, Paul and Virginie, they start snooping around and they find a young boy in the basement, the son of the two victims. So of course they're like, y'all didn't do your damn jobs.
The local police are like, yeah, we looked for him, we couldn't find him.
So of course that boy gets taken away and ends up in a hospital being cared for by a psychiatrist played by
Sandrine Bonnaire.
So for the middle, 45 minutes in the movie, we have these two investigators begrudgingly working together and also being told of this local folklore called the Soul Eater, mainly from the young boy of the initial victims, whose name is Evan. And that's all he can talk about as a Soul Eater. So during this time, which seems like it's only a couple of days, there are additional murders.
Violent murders.
We see Virginie's character go to the local church and read about the Soul Eater, and the priest there is being kind of weird about it. It's important to know that while Virginie is more no-nonsense, she still believes that there's something not right, that it's not just an open and shut murder-suicide. But Paul's character, he's carrying around pictures of 6 missing children, and he seems very invested in solving this case. But a few things come to a head. One is that some of the victims, their computers are missing. So of course, the investigators want to find the computers, and they do find someone's computer, and it's Paul's character who does, and then sends it to his like IT person.
Cortez.
And they contact him saying, girl, I looked this shit up and there's some really nasty stuff on here, like some dark web stuff. I see that the person who owned this computer is part of this like group chat in like the dark, like some chat forum on the dark web that's also linked to the other victims. And it's this chat forum that involves like child abuse, like really bad stuff involving kids. And the admin of this group, their IP address links to a sanatorium in town. This sanatorium is important because we find out that this town used to be bustling back when that sanatorium was active. But since it's closed, it's affected the economy.
Yeah, it was kind of their main source of any outside income.
So of course the investigators hightail it to the sanatorium and they find a really unsettling scene where it's clear that children are being abused physically and sexually with cameras everywhere, and that people pay big money to watch it. They also discover that there appears to be like 5 people leading this group, or 4, and all of the victims, all of the people leading it are accounted for because they were the victims who were killed, except for 1. Okay, so then it's like, well, who's the one? But before we get there, they discover that because Evan, the boy who was in the hospital, he had escaped. So they find him there locked up, along with the daughter of one of the other victims, it was like another murder-suicide. She's the daughter of those people. Okay, another recurring plot point in the movie is they keep talking about this Cessna, this small plane that crashed in the area. So, of course, the long legs reference in my pull quote relates to these investigators and the supernatural element. The cocaine bear reference in my pull quote is for the this plane that crashes had a bunch of like this new synthetic drug on board.
Yeah, somebody said it's worse than Flocka.
Yeah, and these 2 kids had discovered it. They found it in the forest and they saw that animals were dead and clearly they had been eating it. And then the kids start experimenting with this drug on their, like the pets around town. And they discover that it causes the animals to like freak out and then like kill themselves or each other. So this is where the Menendez brothers part of my quote comes in, because these 2 kids were part of this abuse ring. Their parents were abusing them too on camera. So these 2 kids decided to sneak their parents the drugs.
And because the parents were also at this point kidnapping children from surrounding regions.
Yes. Some of those kids are the ones that Paul and me is carrying pictures of. Okay. So we discovered that there's no supernatural element. It's these kids who gave their parents these drugs that caused them to do the murder-suicides. And we can get more into it. But another gag is that the final person, like the head of this child abuse ring, guess who it is? The psychiatrist at the hospital, Sandrine Bonnaire.
Which was not surprising to me because of the casting. Like, you don't have a major actor like Sandrine Bonnaire doing kind of nothing until that moment.
I should have known better, but I didn't. It was a surprise. And then, of course, you think, well, what about this whole soul eater shit? Because the kids keep talking about it like it's real. And something that the film is doing is that we see the soul eater from the kids' perspective, like they're actually seeing it. We find out that the psychiatrist had basically been brainwashing the kids.
Because it's a local legend that everybody that lives there knows about anyway.
Right. So the town supports this idea of the soul eater. And when these kids were trafficked to the sanatorium for the abuse, all of the people running it would wear these masks that look like the soul eater, which is like this
horned creature.
Yeah.
That looks like
something from The Substance or something.
Well, I was thinking if I Saw the TV Glow had even a bigger budget with how that man in the moon looked.
Yes.
And he looked creepy like that.
Yes. And also the little girl, she's not a little girl, she's probably like 13, but she had been carving these dolls that look like them. So for the entirety of the film, it seems like the soul eater is something, but it's really just that they've been brainwashed. And then the final gag, because when Paul Hamy's character had first shown up, Virginie's character was kind of like, she was unsettled by him, and so she did her own digging. So initially, they didn't work well together, but by the end, they did. But right like at the 11th hour, when they discover these kids, she gets a phone call from her colleague saying, girl, that man who you told me about, Frank, he's not in the system. Ain't no Frank. So then she realizes that, oh my God. And as the audience, we're like, oh my gosh, is he the ringleader? But then he admits that.
Well, as soon as we get that, not even like a beat later, we learn like, oh, he's the dad of one of the dead kids.
One of the pictures he's carrying, and we see it in a flashback earlier, his kid, but we don't know it's his. And then we realize that one of his kids was the victim.
Which is creepy because he has a gun to Sandrine's head and he's like, what did you do with my son? And they're right in front of a furnace where they basically have been burning the dead bodies of the children.
And she admits very freely, like, yeah, she's even mocking his dead son, like how he was screaming daddy when he died.
She has footage of it.
And she shows him footage of it. It's so unsettling. Mm-hmm. So of course he wants to kill her. But Virginie is like, no, you can't do that. It's wrong. She needs to, due process. She'll get her day. So it seems like maybe he will, maybe he won't. But all of a sudden, those two kids come and strangle her and feed her.
They have a handful of that drug, which looks like some kind of blue pop rocks.
Or it looks like those gel rocks you put in the flowers to add water to.
Yeah.
They shove it in her mouth.
It looks like poison.
And we also know that Paul Hamy been carrying around like a pocket knife. So knowing that the drug is going to hit her and cause her to do harm to herself, he just throws the knife at her and they walk out. Mm-hmm. Another important plot point is that Paul Hamy's character carries around a singular cigarette. And he explains that he used to smoke, but he stopped. And he kept one cigarette. And he told himself and all the victims' parents that when he finds out what happened to those kids, he will light this final cigarette and smoke it. Mm-hmm. So now that he's uncovered everything and caused this lady to kill herself, and we hear her screaming in the background, he pours like vodka everywhere and lights the sanatorium on fire with his cigarette. So we hear this woman screaming while the building goes up in flames. Mm-hmm. Virginie has taken the two kids out to safety and he walks out, hands her his gun and says, bye. And she goes, well, who are you? And he says, I'm a ghost. The end. And
then we should have had Ladytron's ghost playing over the end credits, but...
This story is so wild. And I think that coming from the people who wrote and directed Inside, it feels very appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, there are some choice violent scenes. We get a flashback of those parents that basically cannibalize each other to death.
I thought that scene, because another important plot point is, at one point the medical examiner tells Virginie, those two initial victims, I found vaginal secretions and semen in their undies, which makes me think that they orgasmed while they were killing each other. So that was super creepy.
But, I've seen a lot of genre films, and basically everything that we're getting is a clue. So it's like upon the second news footage we're hearing about this plane, I'm like, okay,
it's going to come back into the fold.
There's something to do with that, the sanitarium, and it comes together in a nice kind of B-grade souffle. Like everything's explained for. I'm glad that it's not supernatural. Mm-hmm. It makes a hell of a lot more sense than Longlegs. At the end of the day,
I mean, I think I like this more than Longlegs.
I like the tone. The tone of it is a lot more cohesive. The characterizations are better because I don't believe Micah Monroe for a minute in that characterization in Longlegs. But the tone is really nice, and I think Paul Hamy and Virginie Ledoyen have some really good chemistry.
I really liked both of them. I think Paul Hamy's really good looking, but he's rugged, but also soft. Mm-hmm. I really liked his presence on screen. Mm-hmm. I liked Virginie. She's really stern, but it's clear that she's like about her business.
Oh, for
but
sure.
Then there's a softer side to Sears when she realizes that.
Well, we get background on her.
Yes, that her daughter
had recently committed suicide.
Yeah.
And she also maybe had an attempt or something, like she had been hospitalized, and of course the local police know about it, and they are caustic with her from jump.
Well, because the local police, because initially they're acting like when small town cops, when the big city people come in, there's like resistance. But then when we find out that the cops are in cahoots with this child abuse ring, like some of the cops, and that's why they were kind of like not trying to help these outside investigators. What else did I like about the movie? I like the look of the film.
Yeah, it was shot by Simon Roca, who did Candisha for these filmmakers. Also, he's lensed Mr. Hamy before in a bizarre F.J. Osang film called Nine Fingers from almost a decade ago.
There are a couple of, besides the scene you mentioned with us seeing the initial couple like murder each other, which I thought was very well done. There's another scene where we see two characters be killed/murdered that I thought was really effective. There's a moment when Paul Hamy is being attacked by one of those people and Virginie has to shoot and kill that man. Mm-hmm. There's a chase scene between Paul Hamy and this mysterious man on a motorcycle.
Which ends up being one of the cops, played by Malik Zidi. He's been in many things too.
And I thought, it's not at the level of like a Tom Cruise running in a Mission Impossible, but it's definitely it was very effective.
I think the introduction to both the leads is good as well, because they're both making their way to this small mountain town, and he hitches a ride with Virginie. He knocks on her window. They're stuck. There's some kind of impediment in the road, and they're stuck. And he knocks on her door and asks for a ride, and he shows her his badge.
Well, before that, he's putting up his thumb to hitchhike, and she kind of looks at him and then drives off.
Yeah.
So then when there's this traffic jam, because there's like a truck with logs that came off the truck, then he taps on her window like, well, thanks for picking me up. And she's like, okay, like, I'm not going to give you a ride. And he's like, well, oh my God, his job title is so funny to me, because he's like a commander who's part of the Department of Alarming Disappearances.
Yes, what kind of alarming disappearances?
No, he flashes his badge.
She's the commander. He says he's from the National Gendarmerie, I believe.
Yeah, but specifically the Department of Alarming Disappearances. Yeah. And he shows his badge, and she's like, well, okay, let me see your badge again. And he's like, never mind, I'll find someone else. And she says, get in the car. Mm-hmm. And at first I'm like, why would this lady pick up this strange man who's clearly lying about something? Mm-hmm. But then we find out when they get to their destination, he really isn't, he's trying to investigate. But then she gets out of the car.
He's like, you can leave now, this is where I'm going. She's like, we're going to the same place.
She's like, we're going to the same address. And then all of a sudden the police are like, hey, Sergeant, or whatever her title is.
Commander. And she goes, she's like, you didn't ask me anything. Like, yeah, you did.
She goes, a good investigator would have clocked me like 2 minutes into the drive.
But as we're watching, there's so many moments where Paul, like the chase scene over the logs, Paul Hamy does not shoot. Like he consistently is not shooting the person, and because he's not trained to do so.
Yes, I was so frustrated. Like, why is he not shooting? He keeps saying, stop or I'll shoot, stop. And I'm like, how many times are you going to say it before you actually do it? And it happens like twice where he's like, okay, any day now you can shoot these people. They have more than, like, you're more than warranted in shooting the person who's trying to run away.
Right.
But then when you realize he's not actually law enforcement, then it all makes sense.
I kind of reminded me a little bit, I think it'd make a great double feature with Fabrice Duwelz's new film, Maldoror, the Belgian filmmaker who I really like, which is based on a true story about these, in Belgium, these childhood disappearances that were exacerbated, as in the man that was doing it kept getting away with it because of interdepartmental jurisdiction bullshit. And then the surprise I had at kind of coming around to these two filmmakers again, who I've kind of been consistently disappointed with, was kind of like, you probably don't remember this, but there's this 2014 movie by Nicholas McCarthy. He directed a movie called The Pact, that got a lot of attention in a sequel, but we randomly watched his 2014 movie At the Devil's Door, which also had some really nice atmosphere. And I remember also, it's nice to be genuinely surprised again.
So there's a moment when, I think it's when Virginie's in the church learning about the soul eater, and you were singing, "You won't eat my soul."
We need a little Beyonce up here in the French mountains.
You know what? Another really good scene is Virginie is driving. Something that did bother me, though, is Paul makes his way up to the small village without a car. Mm-hmm. And he's also not dressed professionally. He's dressed like a hitchhiker. That really bothered me. Like, I wish he would have dressed more professionally.
But his energy sells it.
It does. And I really liked him. We do get a shower scene with him where he's running around his little towel.
And Virginie's character, Elizabeth, does check up on him, on his badge and name, his credentials.
Well, that's how she finds out in the end that he's not really Frank.
Right. But there are a lot of tropes, really, that are also going on that we've seen time and time again. But when tropes are well done, they're still enjoyable and entertaining. But how many movies have you seen where somebody just shows up on the scene of a crime and we believe them, at face value that they are who they say they are when they have a badge, and it's like not always the case, I guess.
But the other scene I was going to talk about, it's the chase scene. But before that, Virginie's driving her car with Paul in it. And she goes, I think someone's following us, that motorcycle. And so they turn around, put the light on top of the car. And that motorcycle starts shooting at them. Mm-hmm. And then Virginie runs, she hits the motorcycle. I thought that was really well done. Mm-hmm. Then the chase sequence starts. But during the process, the bike rider's leg was injured. So when Paul catches up to him and he's holding him at gunpoint, tell me something, he's digging the gun in the man's wound. Mm-hmm. I thought that looked really good. Oh my gosh. When Paul's at the hospital because Virginie was injured during the chase sequence because she crashes the car. Mm-hmm. So he's visiting her, and that's when he gets information about the dark web stuff and the IP address being the sanatorium. He walks up to the health unit coordinator, the receptionist at the hospital, and he just asks her, do you have a car I can borrow? And this lady lets him take her car.
You know what that reminded me of? That scene in Gothica where Halle Berry's trying to escape?
Yes, and that orderly lets her borrow his car.
She's already been locked up, accused of butchering her husband, and the orderly's like, sure, take my car.
Okay, in my pull quote when I said that it may be a little too bold for its own good, I think that the whole synthetic drug component, which is a huge plot point as to how the people die, I appreciate it in that it removes the whole supernatural element.
Same.
But I just think that it was doing a little too much. And I kind of wish that maybe we would have taken that out and further developed this brainwashing about the Soul Eater.
Yeah.
And maybe that the kids are actually doing the killings.
Or kind of like Who Can Kill a Child mixed with Manchurian Candidate. Like that's what Sandrine is brainwashing these kids so they'll be complacent for the abuse.
Because we're told part of the lore of the Soul Eater is that for the monster to die, man must perish. And I thought, wouldn't it be a gag if this psychotic, sick psychiatrist who's trying to brainwash these kids to allow her to abuse them, what if the gag is that they really believe this so much that they think, man must perish, meaning all you fools abusing us. So that's probably the thing because when that hits, it did feel like, whoa, we are really going somewhere, aren't we?
Because I think the third act is so overstuffed with kind of over-the-top twists that it takes a little time to unpack it afterwards to be like, there's some really subversive elements here about, this dwindling economy, and that this is the answer that some of the more enterprising locals have developed to, make ends meet. And because it's also revealed that Sandrine's character is also the school psychologist. So she knows which children are being abused. So that's how she targeted the initial kids for this little dark web plot.
Yeah. There's a movie we reviewed with Shailene Woodley and that gay detective where there's a serial killer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from Damien Chevron, the Argentinian film.
I really enjoyed that film.
Wasn't that called To Catch a Killer?
Maybe. That sounds right.
I kind of liked it too, and it's supposed to be set in Baltimore, but it's clearly not filmed there. But
it's Eastern Europe somewhere.
But I really liked that film.
I like that, and I know some people didn't, but I kind of got similar vibes. This is way more audacious, like my pull quote said, but even with some of it being a little too over the top for me, I would much prefer films like this, where they go somewhere
trying something, a little bit, kind of turns of the screw to an already perfected formula. I'm always going to appreciate, even if it doesn't really work. But again, to me, it makes more sense than Longlegs. I don't know what to say.
What would you give The Soul Eater?
3.5. I
think it's still very good. I would give it 3.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.